All right. Let's watch the new GDF from this weekend called Debunking the State of Israel. Let's go.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But your name won't start changing your ways. Change.
A reading from the book of Joshua. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spake unto Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan. 40,000 prepared for war went before the Lord unto battle, into ye plain of Jericho. So the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. They burnt the city with fire and all that was therein. The book of Joshua is required reading in Israeli schools today. The book holds an important place because in its pages many people think that a precedent can be found for the establishment of Israel as a nation. The book of Joshua provided the muscular and militaristic dimension of conquest and the annihilation of the Canaanites and other ancient peoples that populated the Promised Land. Hi, my name is GDF, and you can probably tell by the direction that this video is going in that I'm not very advertiser-friendly. For that reason, I rely completely on my patrons' organized Bible movement, filling way of Jewish Zion, as we're almost all been real subscribers and donations.
Anyway, sorry, Chad. I didn't mean to step on his shill. Everybody should definitely sub to GDF.
Of the state of Israel, biblical archaeology became an obsession. Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, was, as were almost all of the earliest contemporary Zionists, an atheist. Although many early Jewish Zionists were secular, socialists, and atheists, the biblical narrative was an appealing way of legitimizing the Zionist movement.
He was a fucking atheist, by the way. Young Spinach, thank you for the tier 1. Can you imagine being an atheist to be like, yeah, we should do a bunch of Nazi archaeology. I mean, Zionist archaeology. It's shocking how similar Zionism is to Nazism. They did this kind of cockamamie bullshit too. They went and did their like weird, we're looking for the Aryans. The Aryans. Yes, we found. They did Aryan archaeology. It's just the same shit as Nazism.
Upon assuming his role as first premier, cementing his legacy as Israel's founding father, Ben-Gurion organized Bible study classes in his official residence and was instrumental in making the study of the Book of Joshua a major component of the school curriculum in Israel. It was this atheist socialist Ben-Gurion who declared to the Peel Commission in 1936 that the Bible is our mandate, and was later quoted as declaring, "Though I reject theology, the single most important book in my life is the Bible."
Because he uses it transparently as a fake fucking propaganda document. Now, we're going to do the Romeo update a little bit later, when everybody's here. I understand how the getting him in the West Coast, you know, it's a little early. Still a little early.
Using a nationalist interpretation, the Bible came to become a course material taught as immutable fact to school children. The Bible came to serve as the first history book to be studied by all school children within the Zionist community in Palestine, as well as under the auspices of the Israeli education system within the modern state of Israel, as well as being taken for granted by the scientific community and academia generally. From a collection of theological texts incorporating historical plots and divine miracles aimed at inculcating faith in its readers, it became a compilation of historiographic texts that bore only a smattering of optional religious meaning. So ingrained was the Bible in schooling by 1992 that Benjamin Beit Halachmi, professor of psychology at the University of Haifa, could write, "Most Israelis today, as a result of Israeli education, regard the Bible as a source of reliable historic information of a secular, political kind. And it remained that way even into the 21st century, to the point that under no circumstances is it permissible to skip over the book of Joshua. Moreover, even though the teaching of this past has been proven ethically and pedagogically destructive, the Israeli education system refuses to exclude from the curriculum these shameful accounts of extermination. After all, David Ben-Gurion had repeatedly invoked the book of Joshua to justify the massacres and ensuing ethnic cleansing carried out under the guise of the 1948 war. But even before 1948, the excavation of Palestine was underway during the mandatory period starting in 1917. Indeed, under British control, the first archaeological crusader seeking to dig up the Holy Land as told by the Bible was none other than the American William Foxwell Albright. His legacy as one of the most influential biblical scholars of the 20th century makes his worldview all the more disturbing. As a fundamentalist, Albright did not doubt stories like the Book of Joshua, and even justified them. In those days, warfare was total, and we Americans have perhaps less right than most modern nations to sit in judgment on the Israelites of the 13th century BC, since we have, intentionally or otherwise, exterminated scores of thousands of Indians in every corner of our great nation and have crowded the rest into great concentration camps. It often seems necessary that a people of markedly inferior type should vanish before a people of superior potentialities, since there.
And there you go. That's literally the 19th century argument for Zionism, which is that Zionists are superior because of their race, and they should be able to exterminate the Palestinians. That's it. That's what it is. That's what it is. It is Nazi shit.
There is a point beyond which racial mixture cannot go without disaster. Thus, the Canaanites, with their orgiastic nature worship, their cult of fertility in the form of serpent symbols and sensuous nudity, and their gross mythology, were replaced by Israel, with its pastoral simplicity and purity of life, its lofty monotheism, and its severe code of ethics. In the words of revisionist biblical scholar Keith Whitelam of the University of Stirling, this justification by one of the great icons of 20th century biblical scholarship of the slaughter of the indigenous Palestinian population is remarkable for two reasons. It is an outpouring of undisguised racism which is staggering, but equally startling is the fact that this statement is never referred to or commented on, as far as I know, by biblical scholars in their assessments of the work of Albright. There's just one glaring problem with Foxwell's analysis, and further the foundational texts justifying the Zionist project and the creation of the State of Israel. It's all bullshit. The slaughter as told in the book of Joshua never happened, and the stories of the Israelites in the Bible are not even remotely historically accurate. It was 1999 when Zeev Herzog, professor of archaeology at Tel Aviv University, who at one time was the director of their Institute of Archaeology, wrote a piece for the weekly Haaretz magazine titled Deconstructing the Walls of Jericho. His words were difficult ones for biblical literalists. Following 70 years of intensive excavations in the land of Israel, archaeologists have found out the Israelites did not sojourn in Egypt, did not wander in the wilderness, did not conquer the land of Canaan in a military campaign, and did not pass it on to the 12 tribes of Israel. Additionally, as opposed to the long-held claim of a sovereign united kingdom of Israel, the united monarchy of David and Solomon, which was described in the Bible as a regional superpower, was, at most, a small tribal kingdom. Herzog described...
Yeah, that's why they got completely conquered by the Romans, and then when they tried to do a rebellion, they were swatted aside as a footnote. The only reason we care is because of the religion of Christianity grew out of Judaism, grew out of that tribe, and it proliferated itself, not by strength, but by its weakness, not by might, by compassion. Christianity united all those who were at the bottom. And it was so insidious, it spread so widely, spreading the idea of the equality of men and being judged by your actions and your beliefs. It was radically egalitarian. It didn't conquer. Ghost of Toller, thank you for the tier 1. Unless you're like, unless you're, one of the fucking horse meat eating slop fuckers of, Estonia or something. But other than Estonia, Christianity, for the most part, did not conquer. It was oh, you're pathetic and your life sucks? Well, God loves you.
Describes the ascent of William Foxwell Albright in the 1920s, and later, following the establishment of the State of Israel, the founding fathers of Israeli archaeology, including Benjamin Mazar, Naaman Avigad, Yigal Yadin, and others. Herzog writes that using the Bible as a literal guide to exploring the Bronze and Iron Ages was standard practice from the beginning, which would continue for decades. However, writes Herzog, little by little, cracks began to appear in the picture. To take one example, the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, wandering for 40 years across the Sinai. Many Egyptian documents known to us do not mention at all the sojourn of the Israelites in Egypt or the later exodus of an entire people, which was curious considering the Egyptians kept highly detailed records which included even small incursions. Many documents mention the practice of wandering shepherds to enter Egyptian territory in times of drought or famine and to settle at the fringes of the Nile Delta. Or how about Mount Sinai, where Moses was to receive the Ten Commandments? Generations of researchers have tried to locate the site of Mount Sinai and the encampments of the Israelite tribes in the wilderness. Despite the strenuous efforts, not even one site has been located that would accord with the biblical account. And of course, the historicity of the conquest, or rather genocide of the Canaanites, was especially problematic. Here, the most severe difficulties have arisen. The book of Joshua reveals that as the armed men approach Jericho, the city's walls miraculously collapse, ushering in the slaughter. But Kathleen Kenyon, the excavator of Jericho, established definitively that there is no support for the conjecture that Jericho was fortified with a city wall during the late Bronze Age. In reality, excavations at all the sites uncovered only unfortified settlements, while in many instances, the site held only isolated structures of the ruler's palace and no actual city. Urban culture in late Bronze Age Palestine was disintegrating in a process that lasted hundreds of years and was not the result of
the Bronze Age collapse is really interesting, chat. Have you guys ever heard of that? The Bronze Age collapse is really, really interesting. So what they're really saying is that the whole story of being a conqueror is actually just made up cope.
A military conquest. Herzog isn't revealing that big of a secret, he writes. These facts have been known for years, but Israel is a stubborn people and nobody wants to hear about it.
Well, it's because they use it to fool credulous American Zionists and Christians who believe the dumb fuck Southerners. And I wanna say this, and I wanna say it loud, and I wanna say it proud. The dumb fuck Southern Baptist racist scum who also want to be vicious toward immigrants and oppress women. They believe the Bible is like a history book. They're stupid fuckers and they're evil. As simple as that. Simple as fucking that. And if you're like, oh, Mike, you need to be mean. Stop being so mean to this. Fuck you. You know what America needs? It needs to have a Southern Baptist church suppressed by force. Every Southern Baptist church should be seized. All the church property seized. All these evangelical pastors should be arrested for fraud. And if you're like, Mike, that's too far. That's too far. Oh, well, then you haven't been watching very long, because we've been covering these scum for years, and they really are fucking scum.
How are you, sir? We'd just like to ask you about why you don't want to fly commercial. Why have you said that you won't fly commercial? You said that it's like getting into a tube with a bunch of demons. Why do you think that?
Here's how Inside Edition's chief investigative correspondent Lisa
Inside Edition doing better fucking investigative journalism than all of CNN combined.
Guerrero interviewed televangelist Kenneth Copeland.
They are some of the most popular and flashy TV evangelists in the country.
When we decided to do this interview, we were aware of his schedule. And we knew that he was going to be in Branson, Missouri for an event, for a several-day seminar. And so we flew down there, my team and I.
You kind of caught me off guard here, okay?
We always try to call ahead of time when we do these kinds of interviews and, you know, ask them for an interview. And sometimes they get back to us.
This is the most California-coded woman I've ever seen in my entire life. The Los Angeles is coming out of her veins. But you know what? I'm here for it.
Sometimes they say no. In this case, we wanted to talk to Kenneth Copeland about his comments about getting into a tube full of demons, and he wouldn't fly commercial because of that. Do you think that people that fly commercial are demons?
You give me a chance to talk, sweetheart, I'll explain this to you. But it's a biblical thing. It's a spiritual thing. It doesn't have anything to do with people.
You're a very wealthy man.
Yes.
Yeah. And some people would say that is it appreciated?
May I add something to that? My wealth doesn't come from
Casey, that sounds
alone.
fun.
Because you sell things, books and DVDs.
Yes, and I have a lot of natural gas on our property. Didn't know that, did you, babe?
Now I do.
Yeah, you do.
Calling me baby and sweetheart. My answer to that is that I was really, truly interested in what he had to say. I just let those comments kind of roll right off my back because I wanted him to answer our questions. If I were to get defensive or, you know, say something back to him that would have been ugly, then maybe he would have gotten into his car and driven away. And our purpose, of course, was to try to get him to talk. Because you haven't,
I want to get to that thing about the demons.
Yes, please.
The Bible says in the book of Ephesians, oh, God, I love this. We wrestle not with people.
At the end of the day, when that, 11 or 12-minute conversation was done, we looked at it and we thought that our viewers might want to see the entire conversation. It was one of the wildest.
I know that quote. That's the charlatan quote of the quote. That's you always say that. We wrestle not with people, but with principalities. Although, I don't really like that translation. There are other better translations. The ultimate, you know, whatever you're called out, you're just like, listen, I'm not fighting you. I'm fighting demons and spirits. And you this cockamamie bullshit. Then you're just like, then you steal the bag.
Interviews I've ever done for.
Anyway, that's who is supporting Israel in the United States. That demon fuck. Kenneth Copeland. Honestly, like, I think Reconstruction in the United States, it would be useful to kind of, you know how people have been saying like, oh, like we need to get those people and we need to put them through like intensive fucking group therapy. We need to shut down all of the like apparatuses of that scam. All the televangelists, all the Southern Baptist sects. And I mean it 100%, that the religion that said black people are inferior in the 70s is fucking evil. His duper's delight is so apparent, knows the people eat this shit as he exits his rotten body. Once you learn about duper's delight, you start to see it everywhere. When people start like say something and then they start smiling really inappropriately, that's like the biggest tell.
These issues and more were addressed by a colleague of Herzog at Tel Aviv University, Emeritus Professor of History Shlomo Sand. In the 13th century BCE, the purported time of the Exodus, Canaan was ruled by the still powerful pharaohs. This means that Moses led the freed slaves out of Egypt to Egypt? Sand also took issue with the numbers. According to the biblical narrative, the people he led through the wilderness for 40 years included 600,000 warriors. They would have been traveling with their wives and children, implying a party of around 3 million in total. Aside from the fact that it was utterly impossible for a population of such size to wander through the desert for so long, an event of such magnitude should have left some epigraphic or archaeological traces. The ancient Egyptians kept meticulous records of every event, and there is a great deal of documentation about the kingdom's political and military life. There are even documents about incursions of nomadic groups into the realm. Yet there is not a single mention of any children of Israel who lived in Egypt or rebelled against it or emigrated from it at any time. There's also another, more uncomfortable fact. History can be ironic. Few people have noticed, or are willing to acknowledge, that the land of Israel of biblical texts did not include Jerusalem, Hebron, Bethlehem, or their surrounding areas, but rather only Samaria and a number of adjacent areas. In other words, the land of the northern kingdom of Israel. Because a united kingdom encompassing both ancient Judea and Israel never existed, a unifying Hebrew name for such a territory never emerged. As a result, all biblical texts employed the same pharaonic name for the region, the land of Canaan. Israel, without Jerusalem. Indeed, the second book of Chronicles reveals, with Israel once more intact, he returned to Jerusalem. Though claims to the city have been the source of so much strife and suffering, Jerusalem's significance historically, especially among the Zionist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, is tentative. As explained in a helpful article for the New York Review of Books by Avishai Margalit, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Hebrew University, Margalit points out that the founding of Jerusalem predates Islam, Christianity, and in fact, Judaism itself. It is thought that Jerusalem was founded about 4,000 years ago as a city of ritual worship by the Canaanites. Jumping ahead thousands of years, Zionism had ambitions to create a new Jewish society, but Jerusalem was the least appropriate place for the founding of such a new society. Most of the Jerusalem Jews were part of an ultra-Orthodox community of the sort that the Zionists were rebelling against. A community that lived on donations and did not have the kind of productive life that the Zionist revolution aspired to. It is no wonder, then, that the Zionists preferred to build the new Hebrew city in the golden sands of Tel Aviv. Most of the immigrants to Israel, about 80%, settled along the Mediterranean coast, a region that had never been the historic homeland of the Jewish people. It appears this ambivalence.
Yeah, they liked it because, they wanted to build resorts because they're fucking modern Europeans. The only issue I have with this argument is that you make it too hard. You sound like the guy with calipers. They're the caliper waivers, not us. We're literally just pointing out basic history. Caliper guys are anti-history. This is the exact opposite of caliper guy. Caliper guy is someone who just makes shit up.
Is a historic trend. Unlike Christianity, Judaism does not regard the pilgrimage to Jerusalem as an act of penance for transgressions, or an act that can purify the believer, and we therefore find no recommendation that it be implemented. The data appear to illustrate this point further. We know of approximately 30 texts that provide accounts of Jewish pilgrimage during the 1700 years between 135 CE and the mid-19th century.
That's it?
By contrast, for the 1500 years between 333 CE and
like
1878, we have some 3,500 reports of Christian pilgrimages to the Holy Land.
Yeah.
These words are at stark odds with the Israeli Proclamation of Independence issued at Tel Aviv on May 14, 1948. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people remained faithful to it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return. Exiled from their land is, of course, a reference to the story of the Roman Empire exiling Jews from their province of Judea. This foundational myth is the source of the theory that the Jewish diaspora the world over can trace their ancestry to Palestine. Therein lies their claim to the land, and the reason why Jewish immigrants, wherever they may be, are said to be returning to their homeland when moving to Israel.
Insane.
Authoritative experts on Jewish history take issue with this theory, to put it plainly, not least of which being Israel Yuval, professor of Jewish history at Hebrew University. From his The Myth of the Jewish Exile from the Land of Israel, the Romans, like any victorious army, customarily took prisoners, but they did not have a policy of exiling conquered nations from their lands.
Well, okay, interesting. I'm learning because what I understand is Israel was conquered and they were, Rome liked to set up these like tribute kingdoms where it was like Rome was the Roman Empire had a bunch of like it had like official Roman provinces, and then it had like administrative regions where they would collect tribute, and they it created these like exchanges or fealty pledges where like, oh, if Rome gets attacked, you're gonna send your army with us to fight the attackers, right? And Rome will come to defend you if you're attacked by your enemies, in exchange for you paying money and food. Well, for the most part, Rome didn't exterminate those like tribune kingdoms. In fact, like Egypt was a huge reason why Rome could grow so big, because the Egyptian surplus of grain was exported to Rome.
According to Josephus's probably inflated figures, 1.1 million were killed in Jerusalem, and about 97,000 were captured. Many of these met their deaths in battles with animals and in circus entertainments. Others died of hunger. But otherwise, the Jews were left in place. They emigrated from the land of Israel during the first centuries of the first millennium in a slow and gradual process, and not as the result of an intentional policy on the part of the Roman and Byzantine authorities. The myth remained and was given
pursued opportunities throughout Europe.
Credence when, in the 4th century, Orosius, reviewing the data found in Josephus regarding 90,000 Jews taken captive in Jerusalem, concluded that these prisoners, who according to him were scattered all over the world, were the founders of the Jewish diaspora in general. Tel Aviv University's Shlomo Sand further takes issue with Josephus's estimate of 97,000 captured. There was no such metropolis in the little kingdom of Judea. A cautious estimate suggests that Jerusalem at the time could have had a population of 60,000 to 70,000 inhabitants. But most problematic of all, nowhere in the abundant Roman documentation is there any mention of a deportation from Judea, nor have any traces been found of large refugee populations around the borders of Judea after the uprising, as there would have been if a mass flight had taken place. Hebrew University's Avishai Margalit's views of the supposed exile are also worthy of attention. The claim that a Palestinian Arab descended from the early Jews is no less probable than that of, say, Menachem Begin or Golda Meir. In the popular and ahistoric version of Jewish history, the destruction of the Second Temple is linked with the exile from the land, but a considerable part, perhaps even a majority, of the Jewish people already lived in the diaspora before the temple was destroyed. And after it was destroyed, the size of this diaspora did not increase very greatly. Most of the Jews who survived the Romans' destruction of the country remained in Palestine. It is not particularly far-fetched to conjecture that they were the ancestors of those inhabitants who accepted Islam many generations later. A conclusion echoed by Noor Masalha, formerly the director of the Center for Religion and History at St. Mary's University, now with the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London.
Oh my God, Oriental Studies? Oh no. Change the name. My God. British people not being racist? Impossible difficulty.
It would not be unreasonable to argue that the modern Palestinians are more likely to be the descendants of the ancient Israelites and Canaanites than Ashkenazi Jews, many of whom were European converts to Judaism. Certainly historically, in contrast to the myth of exile and return, many of the original Jewish inhabitants of ancient Palestine had remained in the country but had accepted Christianity and Islam many generations later. A view at one point held by Israel's earliest leaders, including David Ben-Gurion himself, if it can be believed. Writing in collaboration with Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, Israel's longest-serving president, the pair published a book-length study titled The Land of Israel in the Past and in the Present. Speaking of the Palestinian farmers, or fellahin, the fellahin are not descendants of the Arab conquerors, who captured the land of Israel and Syria in the 7th century CE. The Arab victors did not destroy the agricultural population they found in the country. They expelled only the alien Byzantine rulers and did not touch the local population, nor did the Arabs go in for settlement. Even in their former habitations, the Arabians did not engage in farming. They did not seek new lands on which to settle their peasantry, which hardly existed. Their whole interest in the new countries was political, religious, and material, to rule, to propagate Islam, and to collect taxes. Further, despite the repression and suffering, the rural population remained unchanged. Indeed, the erasure of history regarding the myriad kingdoms, namely Himyarite, Khazaria, and Adiabene, whose rulers converted to Judaism, was essential to the Zionist project from the very beginning. I would be remiss not to observe how this notion of the global Jewish community as a single ethnicity resembles the darkest days of European nationalist thinking. Daniel Goldhagen's ultra-famous Hitler's Willing Executioners notably addressed European and especially German anti-Semitism head-on in the book's first chapters. Notions of Jews being a nation were bandied about in the anti-Semitic literature. The definition of the Jews that was to emerge in the second half of the 19th century from the confusing fray of conceptualizations, namely that the Jews were a race, were given voice already in the first half of the 19th century. If the claim to the so-called Holy Land isn't a religious one, as the secular Zionist movement and its progenitors claim, then the alleged historic claim lies firmly with the idea of an ethno-nationalist claim via blood and soil. The claim, as we've seen, is predicated on an array of falsehoods used to justify the violent dispossession of the land.
By the way, this is always how fascism works, and always how it works. Always how it works. Is this, this belief of the racial and ethnic superiority of those that are dispossessing others. Should I be pro-genocide or anti-Semitic? Bro. As a gamer, it's hard to decide, but should I be pro-genocide or anti-Semitic? Bro. What, are you okay? Is English not your first language? That sounds like a Northern European to me, chat. Are you from Estonia? Anti-Semitism is the disgusting ideology that fascists adopted because they needed a scapegoat for the fact that their ideas were fucking stupid. And you know what I want to study? You know what I think would be really interesting? A deeper study into bullying and sadism and just kind of domination dopamine. You know what I mean? Like, I want to understand the kind of subjective experience that people have when bullying others, dominating others. And kind of like what goes on in the brains of these people.
The word used continuously for the land for thousands of years. First documented in the late Bronze Age, about 3,200 years ago, the name Palestine is the conventional name used between 450 BC and 1948 AD to describe a geographic region between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River and various adjoining lands. The name Palestine was widely used by the most important ancient Greek historians, cartographers, writers, philosophers, and scientists, including Herodotus, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. The Greco-Roman Byzantine name Palestine is commonly found in major classical Greek texts, especially the histories of Herodotus, written near the mid-5th century BC. Further, Palestine existed as a distinct administrative unit and a formal province for over a millennium. Beginning in the 2nd century...
Which, by the way, the reason why that is significant is because when empires tend to fall, they have a lot of different nationalities within them. And I'm going to say something that for many of you is, you are going to know, and many others of you are going to be like, huh, I didn't know that. But the concept of nationhood or nation state is a couple hundred years old. And border controls are a little over 100 years old. Like, people used to be able to travel to the United States without a passport. If you look at this chat, it appears that passports were only started because of World War I. Do you understand how, like, this, you have this idea of, like, you know, a border and border guards and passports and visa stamps and all that shit. That shit is like a little over 100 years old. How the U.S. passport evolved from status symbol to essential travel document. It was in the wake of the First World War that passports became the official government documents we know today. So, like, 100 years. The standard passport format was established by the League of Nations at a conference in 1920, when the majority of the world's countries agreed to require passports and set uniform guidelines for the document. So this shit is a little over 100 years old. That's it. So all these ideas of nations and states and stuff, this is 100 years old, guys. The human race has been on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years. Some people argue millions. And people think this makes sense. That we should carve a wall across the entire American continent, destroying God knows how many animal species, blighting our environment to try to contain a flow of human beings. For a document that's 104 years old. Are you okay? Imagine if Central Iraqis said we're not Iraqis, but we're Sumerian, because before Iraq existed, the Dalawat of Iraq, and before Battleby existed, the region was called Sumer. But what the fuck? But Israelis have been saying that for 75. Yes, it's very weird. It's almost as if history is always changing. What I'm trying to say is the idea of these nations is not a firm idea. It is a social construct that's about as old as women voting in the United States. It doesn't, like, you are falling for these ideas that don't have any purchase in the human body or the human spirit. They are organizations of power that are very recent innovations.
Era with the Roman province of Syria, Palestina. Emperor Hadrian chose the 1,000-year-old name Philistia, the most common geopolitical designation for Palestine used by Greek geographers and historians, long before the Old Testament stories were put together. With the advent of the Byzantine Empire, Palestine was separated into 3 provinces: Palestina Prima, Secunda, and Salutaris. Moreover, these 3 provinces were effectively governed politically, militarily, and religiously from Palestina Prima as a 3-in-1 polity from the 4th century until the early 7th century, as was Iraq, under British rule following the First World War, through the 3 provinces of Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul. As the Rashidun Caliphate began their rule in the 7th century, the name remained as the province of Jund Filastin for 4.5 centuries before being interrupted by the Crusades. With the Crusaders defeated by the Mamluks, the name was revived where it was the land of Philistine throughout the Middle Ages and well into the 20th century. To provide you a woefully incomplete timeline, a map containing Palestine by the cartographer Muhammad al-Idrisi exists circa 1154. We have additionally a map of Palestina from 1320 by Marino Sanudo. Jumping ahead to 1450, Fra Mauro completes the most detailed map in the world up to that point, showing Palestina. The map of Palestina Moderna et Terra Sancta is published in 1480. Jumping further to the 18th century for Palestina ex Monumentis Veteris Illustrate, published in 1714. In the next century, 1803, we see the Ottoman Jazid Adlas Tarjumesa. In the 15th century Mamluk literature, Mujir al-Din al-Ulaymi refers 22 times.
What's the pathway to dissolve modern nation state into borderless societies? I mean, listen, I do think that with the development of technology, human beings now have the ability to connect parts of the world that were geographically isolated. And we have a responsibility to nature and to the natural world not to have these technologies blight biodiversity and destroy native species the best we can. So I do think it's a good idea overall, because a lot of people are very stupid to have things like checks for agricultural blights and invasive species and making sure that people aren't being trafficked, things, keeping track of how people are immigrating and moving around so that we can intervene, because it's a big world. All right, I don't think there's a problem with that. What I do think is a problem is trying to create these iron walls of separation and to prevent people from reasonable population flows. And it's, it reminds me of the southern United States. And it used to be that people from Mexico would live in Mexico, and then they would come up to the United States temporarily to work agricultural jobs, and then they would go back to Mexico. And because the border wasn't enforced, because the border was porous, because there weren't passports, people did that, and it was fine. You had administrative division, but you didn't have population division. And it was the racist attempt to divide the United States away from Mexico that resulted in a lot of people just coming over the border and staying. because it was easier to try to flow back and forth. And so you, by trying to be a racist, you created the massive population and permanent migration. It backfired.
To Palestine in his glorious history of Al-Quds and Al-Khalil. By the 18th century, we can see that Palestine as a distinct country was common perception in Europe. In 1747, Thomas Salmon describes Palestine for the Modern Gazetteer of London. And the ubiquitousness of the name Palestine to describe the region is apparent certainly in the 19th century,
of course,
as these titles show. Of course, Queen Victoria sponsored the Palestine Exploration Fund to explore biblical locations and obtain a foothold in the strategic location. The turn of the Victorian era coincided roughly with the descent into European nationalist conflict, which culminated in the First World War, after which the League of Nations universally accepted the name Palestine for the region, now under British control. And so the British military governor Sir Ronald Storrs established the Palestine Archaeological Museum. The British Mandatory Government of Palestine produced Palestine passports, currency including the Palestine pound, and postage stamps. The colonial police force was named the Palestine Police Force. The government-owned railway company would be Palestine Railways, as well as the Palestine Sport Federation and Broadcasting Service. It wasn't just the British, of course, but also the First Zionist Congress, with their Basel program calling for the establishment of a publicly and legally secured home in Palestine for the Jewish people back in 1897. The Zionist settlers established the Jewish Agency for Palestine, the Palestine Post, the Palestine Office, the Palestine Orchestra, the Anglo-Palestine Bank, the Palestine Electric Company, the Palestine Water Company, the Palestine Mortgage and Credit Bank, Automobile Corporation. Of course, later on, a systematic renaming of the destroyed villages, a result of the Nakba, or catastrophe of 1947 to 1949, entailed the renaming of place names, often arbitrarily, using a revived modern Hebrew language. Indeed, a 1956...
Actually, that's what's really interesting. Did you guys know that Hebrew is just made up? Like, they just made it up? They're like, well, we need to create our own language. They took a language that was dead, and then they just started using it. And it like, modern Hebrew is not the same thing as biblical Hebrew. It's just, they decided to make their own language to try to reinforce the idea that there's some sort of deep connection to this area. But in reality, it's made up. It'd be like if I just started speaking Latin, and then I went to Texas and like stole Austin, and then made everybody start speaking Latin in Austin, and was like, what? This is normal. It's my language. It's my culture, Latin. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Committee report of the official Government Names Committee, set up in 1949 by Ben-Gurion, to rename Palestinian towns, states
all
that...
All languages are made up, though, and modern languages are almost indistinguishable from their earlier forms. All languages are made up is definitely true, but also wrong in this... English was not dead for 2,000 years, and then a bunch of people who immigrated to the UK decided, I'm going to start speaking English, and they kick out all the people who live here. That's freak shit. That's nothing is like that. No other language is like that.
That a decisive majority of the names were determined by mimicking the sounds of the Arabic words, a partial or complete mimicking, in order to give the new name a Hebrew character, following the accepted grammatical and voweling rules. Said
weird.
longtime defense minister Moshe Dayan, Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You do not even know the names of these villages, and I do not blame you, because geography books no longer exist. Not only the books do not exist, the Arab villages are not there either. There is not a single place built in this country that didn't have a former Arab population. Detractors of Palestinian history, who apparently totally dominate the Western narrative of the region's history, will challenge the legitimacy of the Palestinians' indigenousness to the land by claiming that there was no sovereign kingdom of Palestine before 1948, or that there was no such thing as a Palestinian, a claim made famous by Prime Minister Golda Meir, birth name Mabovich, an immigrant from Ukraine. But not all states, it seems, are held to this standard. After all, the term Ukraine was apparently first recorded in the year 1187, or 16 centuries after Herodotus's histories. Additionally, the use of the term Ukrainian, according to the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University, was a term of relative obscurity as late as the 19th century. Ukraine, at various points in its history, enjoyed only brief and fleeting periods of relative autonomy, though under the thumb of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and especially Russia. Though in the Western world, the sovereignty
of Ukrainian is just Russian. Like, everybody knows that, right? Like, it's just kind of like a dialect of Russian. It'd be like if somebody was like, Southern English is actually Confederate. Okay, you guys don't say y'all. I mean, doesn't Ukraine just mean like Western border or some shit? Oh, ha! Okay, why am I laughing? It says, borrowed from Polish Ukrainia or Russian Ukrainia from Old East Slavic Ukrainia, which is most commonly taken to have meant borderland marches. Okay, so if you don't know history, which is okay, I don't know very many people who actually know history. I think I've, like, outside of literally a university setting, I can't count on one hand the number of people I've met who actually know anything about history. And I've talked to 50,000 people. And okay, so a march has a meaning. Okay, a march is basically a county or a province or a duchy that is the border of a feudal kingdom. So, like, I'll give you an example. Along the Pyrenees between France and Spain, those counties, which would be marches, and they would be kind of more important because the king would give lower taxes to the counts who were in the marches, which means just borderlands, because they were required to have more men ready, build more fortifications, have larger standing militaries, watchtowers, etc., because they represented the likelihood of military confrontation. So literally, being called a march means that you are subservient to another kingdom. Ukraine literally means subservient. Or march, which means borderland area between, like, that's actually really funny. And by the way, like, the myth of Ukrainian nationalism needs to be created in order to defend the state of Ukraine. All right. Like, the Ukrainian nation is invented because you have to invent it in order to have a state. So I actually think Ukraine and Israel are very similar.
Ukraine is very much not in question. Their claim to nationhood and their right to live free of foreign domination and destruction.
Isn't this Putin's main argument for the war? I think Putin's argument, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter that Ukraine is made up. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter. Because all nations are made up. Da, 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 as I've been trying to explain. All nations are made up. But that doesn't mean that you should support invasions and aggressive wars and moves to change the international status quo by force. Okay? Like, I wouldn't agree with the United States invading Canada. Even though it's one of the most like the division between Canada and the US is fucking hilarious. I mean, like, look at this. Like, look at this. Yeah, we're gonna just kind of have a slide that just kind of goes, you know, goes straight. It's like, come on. You think there's any division here in nature? It doesn't even follow rivers or hills or mountains. There's this is nonsense. Canada's not a real place. And honestly, America and Canada don't even really act like separate countries. They do in some small ways, but for the most part, like, people just drive across the border, they work, they, you know, they do things. There's a lot of intercourse and trade, and, you know, Canadians and Americans, you know, no one really gives a shit about this line. There's literally towns on both sides of this. There's like streets that go on the border, and people live in houses across the streets. It's not fucking real. But we have to pretend that it is.
I'm not allowed to cross this road because this is the town of Stansted, Canada. On the other side of the street is Derby Line, USA, and the border between the two countries runs right down this, Rue Canusa. For the local residents, that can be inconvenient.
I lived there all my life, so 63 years. Today, you cannot cross over the line and visit your neighbors like years ago. If you want to cross, you have to report at customs. You know, I used to cross every day. Now I probably cross once a week because I come down to the post office over here. To go through the border, basically, they ask you your passport. They go inside. I guess they look at if you have a record or not. They look at your registration of your car. About a couple minutes and you're gone through. I'm a dual citizen, so I'm American and Canadian, so it's easier.
This is a place where the idea of a border as a solid, easy-to-understand line gets a little bit fuzzy. The road doesn't run at exactly the same angle as the border, not precisely. The official line is that this is Canada and that's the USA, but both countries' maps show the road as being entirely in the US just here and entirely in Canada up there. The houses are definitely in separate countries, but the road, it's not quite as clear. And in practice, if I was driving, I'd be okay. Even on that side of the road, I am considered to be still in Canada, as long as I don't stop and walk up to an American house. It's fair to say that there's a little bit of leniency here if you're just nudging the border by a few centimetres, or if you're on that side a couple of inches. But while I was setting up my camera here, the police turned up, lights flashing, to move along those bikers you saw earlier, who were admiring the view from the other side of the road. It all seemed in good spirits, but they had crossed the border.
Well, the library...
Isn't this fucking stupid? Isn't this actually just fucking stupid? And the reason why they're doing this is fucking 9/11. Before 9/11, they wouldn't have, this would have just, no one would care. You could just walk back and forth, no one would give a shit. But because of 9/11, we created this dumb Department of Homeland Security. And as someone who was an adult or nearly an adult before 9/11 and remembers flying before 9/11 and remembers like life before 9/11, everything we did in response to 9/11 should be repealed. It's fucking worthless. So you have God knows how many guys employed just doing nothing but hassling these people. It's so fucking stupid.
It's part on the Canadian side, part on the American side. But you stay on Canadian side, you stay on the sidewalk, and you go through the front door, and it's permitted. On Canusa Street, there's a sidewalk on the Canadian side. So back years ago, it was tolerated that people on the American side could cross over and walk on the sidewalk. So, you know, basically it's a little dangerous to walk on the side of the road. And now today, well...
It's so funny that the Canadian side has a sidewalk and the American side doesn't. Like, if that is the most fucking... That is so fucking funny. That's it in a nutshell right there. That's it in a nutshell.
Sidewalk, so basically it's a little dangerous to walk on the side of the road. And now today, well, it's not tolerated no more. I think the rule hasn't changed much, but they're more enforced. When you cross, they ask you more questions than they used to, years ago. Before, you went through the border and you knew most of the custom officer, and they used to wave to you,
In 1783,
look at this blight. Look at this blight. Look how fucking stupid this is. Like, don't you see the scar on the land? Just asinine.
Section of the Canada-US border was set at the 45th parallel, a line of latitude. Slightly inaccurate measurements were accepted by both countries, so it was locked in. But as for this specific road, there are local stories about drunk surveyors and pranks, but no one really knows.
Don't hype up Canada too much on the sidewalks. We got the America-type infrastructure as well. I know, I was just laughing at America for being even more pathetic than Canada, which is a very low bar.
Are seldom challenged. The reality is a grim one, that a modern European ethno-nationalist ideology utilized religious mythology and symbolism unfounded by the actual historical record. The shift from a deeply unpopular fringe group to a powerful entity with the backing of the British Empire culminated in the bloodshed that erased hundreds of whole towns, literally wiping them off the map, and depopulating the area of the new state of Israel of some 750,000 people. More were to come in subsequent bloodbaths. That the religious and furthermore empirical justification of this slow ethnic cleansing and ongoing genocide of the indigenous people, the Palestinians, is fraudulent is one of history's most cruel insults. Regular viewers of my work will know that recently I've been hard at work producing a series on the Israel lobby. This volume you're watching now is the first of a series on Zionism. The Nakba and all its horrors will be the subject of the next one, and it will be my most important video yet, by far.
She has no idea who Mike is.
Mike. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you are. But your name, wanna start changing your ways. Change your ways. We're changing your